We're going to review the F1 from top to bottom, starting with basic items, moving on to advanced items, and then we're going to do some modifications to it, open it up, and check everything out. The bottom line is if you're looking for a good light with a USB charging port, then this is definitely the light you want to buy, and I'll show you why once we do some testing on it. The USB charge port is protected by two O-rings, and it's hidden behind this threaded locking ring, so you unscrew that and you have access to your charge port. If you plug it in without turning on the tail cap, it'll blink on and off like this to tell you that it isn't charging. And then you can push the tail cap and it'll start charging. And it charges at a maximum of 0.94 amps. You're probably wondering if the flashlight can be used while it's charging, and the answer is it cannot be. So I think for the given size, it's okay that it can't be used while charging. So those are the main features of this flashlight. Now let's take a look at everything else. This review is made out of 6 parts. In part 1, the introduction, we're going to briefly go over the light and give you a summary of everything. And then in part 2, we're going to review some more things in detail, like out the front lumens and runtime. And then in part 3, we're going to review all the detailed items, like group modes and all that. And then in part 4, we're going to compare it to a whole bunch of other lights. And then in part 5, we're going to review some modifications you can make to it. You can jumper the current limiting resistor and get 34% more light out of this thing. And then in part 6, I'm going to compare this light to all the other lights and show you beam shots at the trails and at the field to give you an idea of how well it performs against the other lights. So let's get it on with this review. We're going to compare the F1 to the rest of these lights. These pictures help compare the F1 to the O-Light, C8, S2 Plus, M3, 348, L6, Skyray King, and then here's the F1 again. If you take a look, the Skyray King looks a lot like the F1. And that's because it has a good beam angle, a nice field angle, so it's kind of like a thrower or a utility light. So you can use it to check out your car, see if there's any screw holes in your tires, stuff like that. It has a 13-degree beam angle, so it's pretty tight, but it has a good enough wide field angle for you to look around the bushes, go in the trails. It makes for a good walking light. And here's a bunch of pictures to compare it against the L6, Skyray King, S1R, C8, S2 Plus, M3, and 348. It's got the highest lumen output for all my single LED flashlights. We'll take apart the flashlight, look at each part independently, and see how it all comes together. All the parts are high quality parts. Even the driver is hot glued together so that it doesn't fall apart when you drop it. So this thing's very impact resistant and will hold together for many years to come. It's got an integrated shelf in the center body. It's got a nice thick copper MCPCB board for the LED to sit on, and it's got the XPL non-de-domed version, so it's got the XPL domed version in there with a smooth reflector punching all that light out the front. In stock form, this thing puts out 60 lux on the Lux-o-Meter, but you can supercharge it and make it put out even more than that, 79 or even 90 it says sometimes. This thing in stock pulls 4.04 amps. And if you pair it with a 3500 milliamp hour battery, its lowest mode actually pulls very little, and it can last 61 days or 1,474 hours, which is a way longer runtime than any other flashlight I have. It has a flicker index of 0.0. You can see that the cheap eBay light has a bunch of flickering, and it actually flickers 100% instead of 12%, and it has a 0.6% flicker. Comes with a nice neoprene case, which is a nice touch, lets you hold it and carry it around. And it comes with a nice side clip, very thick, and of course it has that integrated chargers. And also comes with a cable, so you can put it in your car, charge it up, and you can always keep it fully charged. The zanflare I have is a high color temperature, that's 6000 to 6500, but you can also get a lower color temperature at 1240 lumens, but you can also jumper the current limiting resistor and put out even more from this flashlight. Not only does this thing output the most lumens for a single-celled flashlight, it has the longest runtime out of any flashlight I've got, 1,470 hours or 61 days. That's pretty crazy. Keep in mind that the flare mode only lasts for 30 seconds, but the high mode is still pretty bright. I'd say the best thing about this flashlight is the integrated charger. It works very well, and it's awesome that they give you a micro USB cable too, because you can never have too many of those. You can pause it at any time to check out these tables or go back and take a look at them closely. In the rest of this video, we're going to compare the F1 to all these other lights. And I think the best feature of this light is the long runtime and the micro USB port. None of these other flashlights have that. That's what makes the F1 stand out from the rest, aside from the super high output. So now let's check out the light in detail. Now on to part 2, basic review items. Comes in a pretty nice box, very well protected. It's got a zipper for you to unzip, and that's a very nice box actually. Designed by Eastside in Beijing. So it's going to keep it nice and protected. Easy to open up. Don't need a knife or nothing. Look at that. Lots of bubble wrap, so you can chuck it around, nothing will happen. And then there's your zanflare. It's got a nice box, little tape pieces holding it together. We'll open that up, check it out. Comes with very good retail packaging, so if you're giving this away as a gift, it'll make a very good gift. It's nicely presented. Comes with this preen case. That's the Cadillac of cases right there. Look at that. They really went all out. Let's hope that they went all out on the actual flashlight as well. Comes with the lanyard, micro USB cable to charge it up, O-ring, and a little side clip. This is not the thickest side clip ever, but it isn't that thin either, so it might be okay. It's got a little pointy edge for a glass break here, so if you need to break through tempered glass, you smack it with that little super hardened point and that'll smash it up. I see they've gone with the XPL V6 LED, and that maximizes out the front lumens. This is the ring that you unscrew so you can stick in a micro USB cable and charge it up. And I think it's telling me there's no battery in there. Let's put in one of our batteries. This is a 3500 milliamp hour. I recommend this battery if you want the cheapest battery with the most runtime, the highest capacity. Make sure you don't get any of those 6000 or ultra fire, anything ultra fire or anything that says fire on it. That's no good. Out the front lumens. Now this is where the rubber meets the road. 1240 lumens. That's a lot for a stock flashlight. It gets the highest rating out of all the single-celled, single LED flashlights out there. Obviously the multi-LED or multi-cell flashlights are going to get a higher output, but in comparison with all the single-celled flashlights, this thing tops the cake. For a standard stock flashlight, this is a lot of power. It equals almost the Skyray King, as you could see by the screenshot in the field and in the trails. The Skyray King throws more light to the sides, but the F1 definitely comes close in lighting up the entire scene. And that's pretty amazing. So most flashlights are around 1000 lumens, so this thing gives you 24% more than that. So it gets 60 lux on the Lux-o-Meter, and that's well beyond the S1R, which gets 48. So let's take a look at the Skyray King. It lights up that field pretty well. But this one does a very good job in comparison to the Skyray King, so I give this one props. Not bad for what it is. So the F1 lights that building up as well as the Skyray King. And I think less of that light is going off to the sides, but it makes good use of that smooth reflector and throws a lot of light down the middle. So if you want something similar to the Skyray King in a smaller compact form factor, I'd say the F1 does the trick. So it can match up to the Skyray King, and that's because it demolishes all the single-celled flashlights. Now let's take a look at the runtime, which is 61 days. In moonlight mode, this thing only pulls 2.381 milliamps. So it can run 1474 hours if you use a nice Sanyo 3500 milliamp hour battery. This battery is probably the highest capacity battery you can get right now, and they're pretty cheap as well if you get them off AliExpress, Fast Tech, or GearBest, depending where you live. So the F1 probably has the longest runtime out of every single flashlight I have, and that's because they have a very low moonlight mode. I think they say it's 1 lumen. But it's a great mode to have because you want to be able to go to a very, very low mode. A lot of flashlight enthusiasts want the lowest moonlight mode, and I think the F1 can give you that at 2.381 milliamps. In comparison, the Convoy S2 Plus with the Biscotti driver in moonlight mode pulls 9 milliamps, and that means it runs 388 hours. So the F1 is a little lower than that, and that allows it to go 1474 hours. The stock S2 Plus driver, the non-Biscotti, gave you around 24 hours, which was pretty low, but not that low. Biscotti driver gives you a good upgrade to 388 hours. So for those looking for the lowest moonlight mode, definitely go for the F1. The first thing I want to mention is that the pulse width modulation is 800 Hz and the flicker index is 0.0. So that's very good. So you just run your app, it's called Viso, and you set the light to something like medium, and you point it right at the camera through a piece of paper so you can diffuse it. So the frequency is 880 Hz basically, and the flicker index is 0.0. So anything that's 0.0, 0.1, that's pretty good. You won't really see much flicker out of that because it's not reducing that much. It's only reducing to like 80 something percent. And the percent flicker is very low. It's not 100%. It's only 11 or 12%. So that's nothing to worry about. You won't see this thing flicker, and even at high brightness right in front of a camera, you'll see that's completely solid, so it won't start flickering. So here's a cheap eBay light, and you see that flickering, it actually is annoying to the human eye, and the camera picks it up quite quickly. So when you're moving your hands and stuff, you'll see that choppiness. You won't get that with the light that doesn't flicker 100%. Those are the dark bands you see. So the zanflare only flickers at 11%, so a movement like this looks pretty smooth. So that's the importance of having 0.0 flicker index, instead of having a flicker index of 0.8 and a percent flicker of 100%. The flicker index is out of 1.0, so 1.0 is the worst and 0.0 is the best. This thing only reads about 100 Hz. So the zanflare produces a very good dimmed light, and it's high quality light that you can use for during when you're riding around or walking around using it. So now let's look at the modes. The zanflare has 7 modes, and you can access those modes using the tail switch or the side switch. Moonlight, low, medium, and high are the only ones that are memorized. Flare mode and SOS and strobe aren't memorized. So right now it's on moonlight, so it's always going to go back to moonlight using that tail switch on and off, and that's 1 lumen. It's very low, and it lasts a long time. So it cycles through low, medium, high, and then back to moonlight if you press the side switch. So that's a single click. If you actually hold it, it'll go to strobe. Click it again and it goes between strobe and SOS. And you gotta hold it to get back into your moonlight, low, medium, or high. If you're on moonlight and you go to strobe, you always get back to moonlight, and the same goes for flare mode. So if you double click for flare mode, you single click to go back to moonlight, and it'll always be on moonlight. So if you're, let's say, walking around on low on the sidewalks, which is perfect, you go across a traffic crossing or some sort of driveway, double click that just so people can see you easily, single click it back to low so you can just walk around normally. So anytime you need lots of light, double click, go back to normal, single click. It's pretty intuitive. Anytime you need light, of course you're going to double click, and then when you want to go back, you just single click. And if you double click and double click again, it just stays in flare mode and resets that 30-second timer. So let's say it's been 15 seconds and you still want to use flare, just double click it again. Obviously it's going to overheat if you do that because of the 30-second turbo timers to keep it from overheating. But if you're outside and it's cold and it's not really getting that hot, then just double click it to reset that timer. One thing to be aware of is that if you're in moonlight mode and you go to flare, don't turn off the flashlight because it's going to jump to the next mode. So if you're in moonlight mode and you go to flare, you turn it off, it's going to go to low, repeat it, it's going to go to medium, high, and then back to low. So now it's in low, and if you double click again, let's say you turn it off, now it's going to be in medium. So that's not something you do all the time, but it's just something to be aware of. And for SOS and strobe, they actually got it right. If it's in strobe and you turn it off, it will go back to moonlight. That's the way I think it should be, but that's just the way it is. So that's one thing to be aware of. Now I'll draw a quick diagram just to visualize what I just explained, and then we'll be able to see exactly what's going on. Now everything's already in the manual, so you can just read through that, but it's always fun to draw it out and show you what I was talking about. So you've got that side switch to help you cycle through those 7 modes, and you've got that tail switch on and off. It's actually a pretty intuitive light to use. You turn on the tail switch, it goes back to whatever mode you were in. So here's a quick schematic of how I think it works. You don't have to really look at too much here, you just have to know that the mode memory is for moonlight, low, medium, or high. It'll go back to any of those modes anytime you tail click. So most of the time you're just going to tail click on, tail click off. Now if you want to double click to get to flare mode, you can do that. It's got a 30-second timer. Once that expires, it's going to go back to high mode. So it won't go back to moonlight if you're in moonlight. Just keep that in mind. That's why I wanted to put that there. And since you're in high, it's going to memorize high. Anytime you turn it on and off, it's always going to go to high, which makes sense because you're using the flashlight on high anyways, so it should memorize that last mode. And then the thing I was talking about, when you're walking down the sidewalk, you're going to be in low mode, double click to flare, single click back to the last mode you're in, so low. It's good to always have quick access to turbo, or flare in this case. And then if you're in flare mode and you turn off the tail, that's what I was talking about, it goes to the next mode. So if you're in moonlight, it's going to always go to low. So just keep that in mind that it goes to the next mode if you use the tail switch. Now if you look at the SOS and strobe side, when you use the tail switch, it goes to the last mode you memorized. So if you're in moonlight, it's always going to go back to moonlight regardless if you used SOS or strobe. So I'm pretty happy with how the modes work, and the most important thing was to be able to get to flare mode and back to low. So that's really useful when you're walking around the streets. It's almost as powerful as a Skyray King, so people will definitely see you if you're on flare mode. Then you can just easily switch to low using a single switch. So it's a nice, simple, and intuitive user interface, and it also hides away SOS and strobe, so you don't have to go to those if you don't need them. So in conclusion, you get a lot for your money. So for around 35 bucks, give or take, you get that pocket clip. You can put a magnet on there, make it way more useful. You get a built-in charger with that micro USB port. It even comes with a good micro USB cable. It has that nice neoprene case, so it works well if you gotta throw it into some other bag. It won't scratch everything up. It has a pretty nice retail box, so you can give it away as a gift, package it up. Its out the front lumens is insane for a stock flashlight, 1240. It's got that 30-second turbo timer, or flare timer in this case, so it's nice and safe. And it's got an insane runtime too. So it's the best of all worlds. It's got the highest output and the longest runtime. If there's any one flashlight you want to carry with you, it's definitely this one. Because it's got that high output when you need crazy amounts of light, then it's got that 1474 hours or 61 days of long runtime. So if the power's out, this thing will get you by just on one battery. Make sure you buy the 3500 mAh batteries so you get the longest runtimes out of your flashlight. And it's got all the modes that you need. Flare all the way down to moonlight, and hidden, strobe, and SOS. I like how they included strobe and SOS. A lot of people don't do that anymore because it's not that useful, but when you do need it, it's there. Its pulse width modulation is not that fast. Its flicker index is 0.0 and it's still pretty awesome. So in conclusion, if you want a flashlight that has everything, highest output, longest runtimes, USB charging, then this is definitely the way to go. You don't have to buy chargers, different batteries, or anything. You just buy the F1, one battery, and charge it from any USB port available. In the airport, by your bedside, in your car. Anything with a USB port will charge this up. So you'll never be caught with a dead flashlight, and that's important to people who walk in the dark, to school or to your car, back from work, whatever. When you cross the street, you can turn on this flashlight, cars will see you. Cars always turn left and can't see you, and that's not really their fault because it's so dark. With the flashlight on, it'll give them a chance to see you. So definitely consider buying the F1 if you don't have any flashlights, and if you do have flashlights, I think it's still a pretty good flashlight to have. It's GearBest's first attempt at a good flashlight, and I think they've done very well. There's a couple minor things I'd fix with it, like coming out of flare mode, but other than that, this is a very good flashlight. If you can carry something this big, I definitely recommend it as an everyday carry. So keep watching the rest of the video for more detailed review items, some comparisons, and some modifications. We're going to compare the F1 to a bunch of other lights, and these are the categories that we're going to use to compare them. So the main thing to note is that this one outputs 1240 lumens. That's the highest amount of lumens out of all the single LED single cell flashlights that I have. It actually scores 60 lux on the Lux-o-Meter, so we'll compare it to the other ones and you'll see that it outperforms the rest. Another two things to note here is that the moonlight mode gives you 1400 hours of runtime, so that's like 61 days. So it has the highest output and also the highest runtime by going to the lowest mode. So this is a very powerful and versatile LED flashlight. If the power goes out, you can put it on low and run all night long. And if you need to light up the backyard or something, you can just crank it on flare mode and light up that whole field. I like the fact that it also has hidden strobe and SOS mode, so you don't accidentally go to them, but if you ever have to use them, you can hold the button down for 2 seconds and get to them. One thing I wish was a little longer is flare mode, but I guess since it's so powerful, the 30 seconds is probably good enough already, because it gets pretty hot after 30 seconds. Especially if you do the resistor mod and make it even more powerful. On the second page, good thing to note is that the flicker index is 0.0, and that's the best that it can be. The other flashlights have 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3, so this one produces very good quality light, and you won't notice any flicker out of it, so that's awesome. Now the bad thing about this flashlight is that you can't take it apart easily unless you've got good tools. What you need are 2 good pliers with a nice rounded head, some rubber to wrap around it so you don't damage it, and then you can get a good grip and unscrew it even though it has permanent thread lock on the threads. You can fabricate your own tools to do it, so if you have flat channel locks, you can grind away some of that and make it rounded so you can get a good grip on it. If you have inner tube rubber, you can wrap that around it and that works really well. So you can modify this if you really want to. You just need the right tools to take it apart without damaging it. And it's just a standard reverse clicky tail button. This thing unscrews counterclockwise. So there's a metal button on the back and a rubber skirt around the outside. So there's a hole in the middle of this rubber piece so that this metal button can sit in between. There's a groove that the rubber skirt goes in, and that's glued in place. So you don't want to take that apart, otherwise you're going to have to silicone it in place or something. And then here's the tail. It's pretty beefy, very strong, and you can drive over that with a truck. There's that little metal point, so you can break glass in a car window or something if you have to, and just hit it, it should break. The body is very thick as well. There's actually a hollowed out spot in the middle, so I guess they're trying to reduce the weight a little bit, and this thing's a little bit bigger than it has to be so that it probably can fit all the electronics inside. It's about 3.83 millimeters thick, so that is very thick, and that's only right about here and here. The center of the body is a little bit, so for comparison, the Convoy C8 is 3.27 millimeters thick, so this is a little thicker, 3.87. And then there's this little locking ring for you to cover your USB port, and then there's the head of the flashlight that unscrews, and then there's a ring in this holding in the reflector. So the ring, and here's your reflector, a nice solid piece of aluminum, and then your front lens, which appears to be coated on both sides. And then there's the O-ring that keeps the water out of the front glass. Glass lens on the front looks pretty thick, and it's 2.08 millimeters thick. And then we've got our LED plastic spacer, the LED itself, and to get that out you have to desolder the two wires, otherwise the wire is going to be holding everything together. So we've desoldered those wires. You just have to lift it up, drop out your LED, and the LED has a lot of thermal paste in the back, which keeps all the heat away from the LED. It's got that nice integrated shelf, so all the heat goes right into that shelf and into the body. And the shelf appears to be about 1 millimeter thick. It would have been better to make it 2 millimeters thick, but I guess they just didn't decide on doing that. The driver has two PCB boards, one on here and then one soldered perpendicular to that, and they've put hot glue on both sides to try to keep it from bending, because when you drop it and it bends and shakes, those solder points will break, and that hot glue keeps it from doing that. And then they've also got hot glue on the top, which I assumed was hot when they pushed it in, so it holds that driver in there nice and tight. So this thing was built to be dropped, smashed around, and be rugged. If you want it to be stronger, like mil-spec stuff, you'd encase the whole thing in some sort of epoxy, and then that hardens and keeps everything in place really strong. But hot glue is going to be fine if you go hiking and biking with this thing. If you drop it, it's not going to break. The wires are 24 gauge. The insulation is silicone, and it's 180 degrees Celsius rated. So these are nice conductors, and they won't melt down or break. The middle body is made out of a thick piece of aluminum, and that thing will not break. Like at the thickest part in the middle, it's 4.14 millimeters thick. So it's pretty beefy, but not so beefy that it's going to be too heavy. It's just the right thickness, I think. The side switch is held on by a metal ring, and the switch itself is the same as the back button. It's a metal button with a rubber skirt around the outside, and that skirt actually gets crushed down by this ring, and that keeps the water out. So as long as this thing's tight, that thing's going to keep all the water out. You could probably pressure wash this thing and it won't leak. When you screw this thing together, the O-rings actually put so much resistance because they're so tight that it's kind of hard to screw together. So you know this thing's going to be waterproof, it's going to be dustproof, nothing's getting into this thing. It's got good low battery protection. It'll turn itself off after it gets down to 2.6 volts. Once I got it taken apart, I took a look at everything inside, and it looks like it's high quality stuff. It's put together very well, and it's put together to last a long time, be solid and be drop proof, so you don't have to worry about dropping this flashlight and having it break on you. They hot glued the components inside so that it holds together strong, and you can drop it, it won't rattle around. There's a bunch of O-rings, and all the rubber skirts are crushed down pretty tight, so you don't have to worry about water getting in there either. It's very water resistant. They say it's water resistant down to 2 meters, so it can be submerged, and I believe that just based on the quality of the O-rings and everything. So the only thermal management I think it has is that it reduces after 30 seconds, and I don't think it's actually keeping an eye on the temperature or anything. I heated it up with a hairdryer, and it didn't reduce anything down from high. It stayed on high even though it was like 73 degrees or something. The price is kind of steep, but it's on sale right now for $32.99. If you're paying for the high output, the good quality materials, the copper MC PCB, which is pretty good, and you're really paying for the micro USB charge port. And that's pretty useful because you don't have to buy a charger. You can charge it up in your car, your office, wherever you are. So the value for the dollar I'd say is 10 out of 10 because it's a very high powered and high quality flashlight, and it has a charger built into it. The charging circuit in there charges the battery right up, so it works well and it's handy to have in there. It doesn't really add to the size too much. So I'd say this flashlight's intended for everyday carry or as a utility light if it's too big to carry for you. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with a battery, but you can buy a Sanyo 3500 mAh battery, throw it in there, and you'll have crazy runtime on it. So I recommend this flashlight to anyone looking for a minimalist solution. Comes with a charger, so you don't need to buy that. All you gotta do is buy one battery and this flashlight. Comes with a charge cable, carry case, lanyard, pocket clip. If you want, you could put a magnet on the side there and make it even better. It lights up the entire trail and the entire field, basically. And it's tiny. So it's a good all-around flashlight. It's not too small, it's not too big. It's pretty powerful, it's not too weak. It's not a huge thrower, but it can throw pretty good and hit that building across the field. So this is a good all-around light, I'd say. They've done a very good job building something that tailors to everybody's needs, except probably the people who want to modify it, because it's very hard to take apart. Hopefully they make a version in the future where they don't put on so much thread lock, or they don't put any thread lock. Then do-it-yourselfers can mod it, replace the LED, and do whatever they want to it. On to part 4. We're going to compare it against all these lights. We're going to put up 2 tables, and we're going to have a bunch of comparison categories. So take a look at what matters to you, and see which flashlight is best suited for that. So I'd say the F1 is a jack of all trades, and a specialist of none. So again, we have 2 pages. Zanflare's on the far left. And if you scan the Lumen output, you can see it's the highest Lumen output. And it definitely shows that on the Lux-o-Meter. And it gets 60 lux. You'll see it has a pretty narrow beam and a field angle at 13 and 57 degrees. So since it has a tight beam, it can throw pretty far. Not as far as the C8 obviously, but it's still a pretty good thrower. And the field angle isn't super wide, but it'll do fine if you're walking down trails and stuff. Now this is a new figure that I put in there, is beam intensity. It's how hot the beam is right in the center at 8 meters away. So you can see that since it's a thrower, it gets a pretty high beam intensity, and that 62 foot candles allows it to throw. But obviously the C8 at 160 is going to throw a lot better than that. And then the L6 is going to throw even better than that, but not by much. And as we saw, the KEYCHAIN doesn't have much throw, and that's evident by the 72 foot candles. So the flicker index for all these lights are pretty good, but the F1 gets 0.0, so tying with the S1R and M3 and the C8. I've upgraded my KEYCHAIN with a MOPI drive, so it's getting a good flicker index and it's a high pulse width modulation. And the modes for this flashlight are pretty much perfect, I'd say, because it has the lowest mode, the highest mode, everything in between, and SOS and strobe that are hidden away. The mode memory works very well, but there's one thing I would change, and that's if you're in flare mode and you turn it off, it should go back to the last memory mode, not the next memory mode. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with it. As always, I like a light that you can go to turbo and then go back to the last mode, so this one does that for you, and it's perfect for walking on sidewalks. It's going to be a good flashlight to walk around at night. The build quality of this thing is insane, and the use of permanent thread lock is actually a good thing, but for modders it's not going to be a very good thing. But for the majority of the public, that's going to keep it held together, make it last for a lifetime, and that's what you want. It's very water resistant. It seems to be impact resistant because everything's glued together and held together very well. Thermal management's pretty good. It doesn't get too hot. It has that 30-second turbo timer, so even if you give it to somebody who's inexperienced, they won't accidentally run it too hot too long and burn themselves. Other lights allow themselves to get pretty hot, and it could be dangerous if you give it to somebody who doesn't know how to use it. So the highest output only lasts for 30 seconds, which is to keep it safe and only get warm. And then the longest output mode is obviously the most insane out of everyone here, and that's 61 days or 1,474 hours. The price is not super high, but not super low, so I'd say it's kind of in between, but it's worth it for that micro USB charge port, which is covered by that metal locking ring. So you're not going to get anything better than this for the money, so I'd say the value for the dollar is 10 out of 10. A lot of the lights in comparison are pretty good, 10 out of 10 as well. The on the road is really cheap and performs pretty well for its price. The L6 is much more expensive, but you get much more light for that, so I'd still say that's 10 out of 10. And the KEYCHAIN is rated very low because although it's cheap, it needs a lot of modding and it will burn out on you if you run it on high mode for too long. Zanflare is GearBest's brand, and that's why they've done such a good job on it. They got a good reputation and they want to keep that reputation up. So I think they've done a good job. They have it well priced. It's got that copper plate on there. I've got it pulling over 4 to maybe 5 amps, putting out maybe 1600 lumens I'd say, and it rates 93 on the Lux-o-Meter. That's no small feat. So this is a very powerful light with good potential. If you're a modder, definitely check this light out. So in conclusion, I'd say this light is a good utility light for the minimalist who wants to just charge one battery and that's it. They don't want 5 batteries, a bunch of chargers, or anything like that. So if you want a very high quality, very powerful stock light, or if you want to mod this light, it's worth checking out. So I hope this video was fun for you to watch and it helps you out. Shows you inside the light, outside the light, everything about it. Now on to part 5, modifications. We're going to supercharge the F1 by jumpering the current limiting resistor. So all you got to do is solder a piece of wire across it and it gives you 30% more light output, or even more. It could be even 50% because I saw over 90 lux on the Lux-o-Meter. But I'll test it out with a proper light meter and then confirm that. We're going to add a magnet on the side, and I'll leave links in the description for the magnets that I ordered. They're just 4mm thick, 20mm long, and about 10mm wide. This is not really a modification, but I'm just going to show you how the glass break works. And we're going to pull the diffuser out of an old LCD screen, cut it to shape, and then it can just pop on the front and turn your spotlight into a nice floodlight. It makes a great floodlight and allows you to do videos and stuff like that. It won't be as even as zoomables, but it'll be definitely wider than a zoomable. So you want to cut out your own diffuser and put it inside the battery compartment. And then anytime you need it, pull it out and use it for close range operations. Very useful for when you're working in close quarters in your car, in the trunk, under the hood, or anything else. So in this portion I'm going to show you how to quickly supercharge the F1. All you got to do is jumper the current limiting resistor and then it'll pull more current. I think it pulled around 4.5 or more amps. And then you got to bypass the tail spring using copper braid. After doing that, we're going to get 79 lux on the Lux-o-Meter. It's a 0.1 ohm resistor, and that just keeps it from having crazy current, which might fry the MOSFET. If you jumper that thing, you'll get more current, but just be careful not to burn out the inductor and MOSFETs and everything. Alright, so we've added a jumper across there. Now let's see how much more current it pulls. So using some 2.5mm copper braid for desoldering and some tweezers. So I made an S shape and I wrapped it around the top and then just soldered the top and then soldered the bottom. Whenever you solder it, you want to go sideways, you don't want to go up and down because the solder is going to seep along that copper and you want it to seep sideways, not vertical. Otherwise you'll minimize the amount of compression you can have before it hits. So we've bypassed the current limiting resistor. Let's double click this sucker and see how many lux it can give us. So it's giving us 93 lux, 94, 95, 96, 94. So it's holding it at 94 lux. It's getting very hot and soon it'll reduce to high. So it's starting to reduce there already. And its high sits around at 44 lux instead of like 36 before. It's not reducing the power as much. It's still pulsing it, but obviously the current limiting resistor is not choking it, so it gets 44. Double click that again, and we're up at like we're up at like 90, over 90 lux, 95, 96. So there you go. That is the supercharged F1. This thing's bright. So now let's compare it to the rest of the flashlights and see how they stack up. The supercharged version will give you 79 or even more. I didn't want to go put in 93 because that's a little ridiculous, but we did see 93 somehow. The Lux-o-Meter is just an iPhone 3GS, so it's not the best light meter ever. So we're not going to trust it, but we'll use it as a guide or something for discussion. It's just something quantitative that's better than saying, I think it looks brighter. So after supercharging it and using it for about 2 weeks, it's still working pretty well. So I definitely recommend trying this out, supercharging it. There is some risk it'll burn out, but I'm using a VTC5 Sony battery, brand new, and it hasn't burnt it out. So even with a very low internal resistance battery, this thing doesn't pull too much current to kill itself. It has great potential, and I'm going to throw in an XPL2. That might cause it to burn itself out because it has a lower forward voltage, so it'll pull more current, and that could be enough to burn out that inductor or the MOSFET. But I'll try it out anyways and report back to see how much of an improvement it gets. over stock. So I definitely recommend supercharging this thing if you're into modding flashlights and having one very powerful light with a good side switch and pretty good driver with a very low moonlight mode and basically a FET driver for flare mode with a nice 30-second turbo timer. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering if this thing breaks glass, yes it does. So the F1 is a great light, only problem is it doesn't have a tail magnet, and the Convoy S2 Plus tail magnet that goes on the Convoy S2 Plus, if you're working your car or somewhere, you want to hook it onto something, the magnet on the tail lets you do that, or the magnet on the clip. The only problem is the tail magnet can't be added, but you can add the clip magnet. So I've ordered a bunch of magnets from GearBest, and the ones that I find best are the 4mm ones. So they just barely fit. Let's get some heat shrink and put it on. So this heat shrink just barely fits, but the thinner the heat shrink, the better, because you won't get a good close connection of the magnets if your heat shrink is too thick. I'm going to put some sticky tape on there just so it can sit a little better. So once you got that centered, slide in your heat shrink. So now our zanflare has been upgraded so that you can hook it onto stuff. So that is pretty strong, and I think even on drywall that'll probably work. Let's try it out. So now if you need to light up rooms, you can stick it onto the side of drywall because there's that metal channel on the corners and light up the room. It can't hold itself up sideways very easily, but it does hold itself facing down or up, no problem. But if it's a metal surface, it can hold itself sideways, no problem, because of those strong magnets. You can just leave it there, and 61 days later, you can come back and put a new battery in it. So it's pretty handy with this magnet on the side. I definitely recommend putting it there. If you work on your car a lot, you can hook it onto the hood or underneath the carriage. So if you're under your hood, you can find something for the magnet to hook onto, and then you can light up your work area nicely. So you can take everything apart, make sure everything's clean, don't get any dirt into your engine and stuff. And if you can see everything, you can complete your job properly and easily. The side magnet is a lot more useful than the tail magnet, because if you get a flat tire and you got to change the tire on the side of the road, you can light that wheel well right up. It's a lot safer for you because other people can see you and you can see what you're doing. So I definitely recommend adding that side magnet. It makes the flashlight way more useful. If you don't have the magnet, you can just put it on the ground. It's got plenty of light, but it's always nice to have that magnet. Now into part 6, comparison beam shots. In these shots, we're going to hold the F1 on the left side, and then the comparison lights on the right side. So first we'll start off with the L6 and work our way down to the Convoy C8. All these other lights are high powered lights, so we probably take it for granted that they can light everything up as well as they do. So I wanted to put the 348 in there just to put everything in perspective. So the F1 is on the left in flare mode, and we'll turn on the L6 to the right. So that's how much the L6 lights it up. That's how much the F1 lights it up. I think you can see that the L6 is much brighter, so if you want a very powerful light, get the L6. But if you want a small powerful light, get the F1. So you can see the difference there. Can't really light up the bridge with the F1, but you definitely can light it up with the L6. And here's the F1 against the Skyray King. So as you can see, the F1 lights the place up in flare mode, almost like a massive Skyray King here. So that's pretty awesome. F1 here, Skyray King. Both of them lights the scene up quite well. And if you want to carry something a little bigger, then the Skyray King works. Otherwise, go with the F1. Remember, the F1 only lasts in flare mode for 30 seconds, so it's not going to light the scene up as long and bright as the Skyray King. Now, here's flare mode on the left against the S1R on the right. So as you can see, it's a lot brighter. Here's the M3 on the right, F1 on the left. So as you can see, the F1 is much brighter and has more throw compared to the M3. M3 doesn't throw very far. Here's the 348 on the right, F1 on the left. F1 obviously lights up everything much brighter. One's good if you want something compact, but if you want to carry something this big and have more light, definitely go with the F1. And now we got the C8, which can light up the bridge quite well, and the F1 that can kind of light up the bridge. So you can see the difference between these lights. This one's a thrower, this one's kind of a thrower slash utility light. So if you want a hot spot, that's the way to go, because it can light the bridge up way more than the F1. See that difference? So if you want a thrower, go with the C8. If you want a general light that lights up the trail pretty well, the F1 works. And of course I went with the warm white C8 instead of the natural white. It's a huge difference. I like the warm white, but if you like this cool white, then go with that. The warm white light seems much better to me, but it's personal preference, so get whichever one you think looks better and you'll be happy with it. So that concludes the F1 comparison. It's definitely a powerful light. So if you want to light up the entire scene with flare mode, 1240 lumens, then this is the light to go with. Right now it's minus 3 degrees Celsius outside, so it doesn't really feel warm, but I'm sure this thing gets hot when you're operating it at flare mode. It is called flare mode after all. So now let's head over to the field and see how it compares in a super throw shot. Now we're going to compare the F1 to all the other lights. So let's pull the sucker out and start comparing them. So that's the F1. So the F1's on the left and the L6 is on the right. So the L6 lights that sucker up pretty well, but the F1 does a pretty good job as well. So if you can carry around a big light like this, obviously the L6 is the way to go if you need lots of light. But the F1 does a pretty good job as well, as you can see, of lighting up the field and that building. So this is a thrower, and it works as a medium to near light. So it's a pretty versatile light, the F1. And this is a great thrower. And it lights up the rest of the field using its field angle pretty well too, because of that dome on the XHP70. So let's take a look at the Skyray King. It lights up that field pretty well. Gets 314 on our Lux-o-Meter. So if you want something similar to the Skyray King in a smaller compact form factor, I'd say the F1 does the trick. It lights up this entire field, similarly to the Skyray King here. So you decide what you want, this or this, depending on what you want to carry. Let's compare the F1 on the left, S1R on the right. So the S1R is obviously a flutter, and the F1 is definitely a thrower compared to it. And then we've got our M3 on the right, and it's not much of a thrower, and as you can see, it's more of a flutter, and that's why it doesn't look very bright. Can't go out as far as the F1. Can't even light up that building. F1 can. So if you want an everyday carry that's very powerful, it's probably worth upgrading to this size if you need this much light. Otherwise this one's fine. And then we've got our budget light form on the right. Obviously it's compact and it doesn't light up the field like the F1 can. So if you can afford to carry something around this big instead of this big, definitely go with this, because it gives you way more light and runtime compared to this. But this is much lighter, so you might want to go with that. And then we've got our C8 versus the F1. So the C8 lights that building up this well, and the F1 lights the building up this well. So the C8 is the thrower, and the F1 is a thrower and a utility light built into one. So if you want a thrower, C8's the way to go. If you want to compromise between a thrower and a utility light, and the F1 is the way to go. So I think that gives you a good idea of how the F1 compares to the other lights on the market right now. It's definitely a very powerful light, resembling the performance of a Skyray King in a much smaller form factor. That's basically how I summarize this light, which is pretty impressive. It won't last as long because flare mode is temporary, but you can always turn it back on if you need it again. Otherwise, high is still pretty good. So it's still lighting up that field in high, as you can see here. And then that flare mode gives it that extra little boost to resemble a Skyray King's performance, which is pretty awesome. So I hope that shows you what the Zanflare F1 can do. So if you want a nice compact flashlight that resembles the Skyray King in a small form factor, then definitely check out the F1. I've got a coupon code in the description right now, check it out. You'll be able to get it for $34.99. Thanks for watching, I hope that helps. I want to say thank you to all my current subscribers. I'll be putting up many more videos and hopefully you enjoy them too. I'll put up links to 4 of my top recommended flashlights. Definitely check them out because I think they're probably the best flashlights that you can get for your money. They're high quality flashlights, great features, and you'll like them. I hope you enjoy.